Hey guys, good hearing from you. I hope you are enjoying 2019 and that things are going off to a great start. So most of my leisure reading, has been non-existent. Most of the books I've been reading have all been through my graduate program, so there hasn't been a lot of opportunity for me to read books that are outside just my field of study. Now that being said, I would say there are a lot of good books I've read. A couple of them, one would be Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton. That one actually was a leisure read this past year in 2018. Looking at sort of the Orthodox view of faith and how that is different from more liberal views of faith perspectives or philosophical perspectives. Another book I would recommend is The Writings of Abraham Lincoln. That one was not a leisure read. That was for my speech writing class. I definitely learned a lot from that one this year. So the premise of Orthodoxy is that traditional thought in the Christian perspective is not as bad or as ignorant as people make it out to be. That traditional Christian conservative thought is pretty well thought out, in contrast to perspectives such as materialism and other philosophies and ideals that seem to go against tradition and the norm. Chesterton's approach is pretty interesting because he goes into how that affects creativity, how that affects our thought processes, and how a person who holds a more liberal philosophical perspective and more materialist and more materials focused sort of thinks a very different way than someone who's more of an orthodox perspective, and so how those thought processes differ, but also does it in a way that is not just scientifically focusing on that like a philosopher, well, not scientific as a philosopher, but also looking at it from creative perspective. It's really interesting. Chesterton was actually the guy who inspired C.S. Lewis to write his books, The Chronicles of Narnia, Screwtape Letters, and all the different books that he wrote that contribute to Christian thought. Meanwhile, in the writings of Abraham Lincoln, you learn so much through his speeches and his written work and his essays about how complex of a man he was prior to and during the Civil War. Many look back at Lincoln and say he was one of the greatest presidents ever, if not the greatest president, because he held our Union together. But if you look at a lot of his writings, I wouldn't say necessarily that anyone is wrong in making that claim, but you look at the complexities of the man, the motivations of why he decided to uphold the Union, and his reasoning supporting a lot of his decisions, you would realize that he's a lot more, let's just say he's more Machiavellian than traditional, to the point where the ends justified the means regardless. And so depending on your take on that, you could come up with having a more negative perspective of Lincoln. Now that being said, Lincoln was a great leader. He preserved the Union, and in the decision he had to make on whether to go into war or not, it was two bad choices: either let the South secede or to go to war against part of his own country. So no matter what decision he made, it was going to be a bad one. And in that type of scenario, I would argue, is where great leaders are formed. But I will not say he is the greatest president ever, for several reasons. Like I said, ends justify the means Machiavellianism. And also, I mean, if you look at historical perspectives, he was arguably more racist than a lot of other presidents. There was one writing in 1862 where it was a recording of when a delegation of black ministers came to visit the White House, and Lincoln literally said, Congress and I are willing to set up a colony for all black people to settle in if the war ends, with Lincoln saying that blacks were inferior and that they could never ever come to agree with whites, and that American life after the war with the Union victory would result in suffering between the two races. And this belief completely upholds Frederick Douglass's claim during his eulogy of Lincoln, that Lincoln was wholly a white man's president, even though he led in the Civil War and that resulted in the end of slavery. Frederick Douglass was like, no, he fought for the white man first. Blacks being free from slavery was secondary to Lincoln. And this is followed up with a discussion between Lincoln and Horace Greeley, the editor of the New York Herald at the time. Lincoln said to Horace Greeley that if he could end the war in a heartbeat without ending slavery, he would do it. So for Lincoln, in his personal motivation in leading the war, slavery was not the issue. It was preserving the Union, and he explicitly states that in his first inaugural address and many other writings. It makes him a very interesting and complex person to understand, because he's looking at the whole slavery issue and the constitutional union issue as two different things, and trying to balance that in a time and an era where people were super divided on both of these issues. Yeah, my personal favorite books that I've read in 2018 were Orthodoxy and The Writings of Abraham Lincoln. I would highly recommend those to you guys. Very insightful reading nice soul. I'll learn from today. Now, that being said, I want to give an honorable mention to the book When Helping Hurts by Brian Fikkert and his brother. This book focuses on how to help those in poverty without perpetuating the cycle of dependency. How do you help people in a way that doesn't cause either greater dependency or cause harm to the people you are trying to help? Basically, helping people and helping groups and countries to increase their own potential and to improve themselves, and not just become dependent on you or you working in a culturally insensitive way. It's a great read. I would also highly recommend that as an honorable mention. But yeah, those are the books I've read last year. I look forward to hearing about the different books you guys have read, and I hope that 2019 is a great one for you.